"Watch your tone, sir." The words cracked through the courtroom like a whip. The murmur of quiet paperwork and shuffling shoes died instantly. Every head turned toward the man standing alone at the defense table. He was nearing 60, tall but unassuming, his dark suit pressed neatly, silver threading lightly through his hair. His face carried a calm that didn't match the accusation hanging in the air. There was no hostility in his eyes, no arrogance, just steadiness. "I apologize, Your Honor," he said gently. "I was only attempting to clarify the timeline." "You will watch your tone," Judge Clayton Mercer snapped, leaning forward on the bench as if the man had insulted him. "You are not here to lecture this court." The temperature in the room seemed to shift. A few spectators exchanged uncomfortable glances. The man had spoken softly, almost cautiously. If anything, he had sounded overly respectful. Yet the judge's jaw tightened as though challenged. The man nodded once, absorbing the interruption. He had learned long ago that tone, when misinterpreted by those in power, often had little to do with sound and everything to do with perception. "Contempt of court," Judge Mercer declared, striking the gavel with sudden force. $500. A gasp rippled through the gallery. The man did not react. Not visibly. He didn't protest or raise his voice. He didn't attempt to defend himself or argue the fairness of the ruling. He simply inclined his head slightly. "Yes, Your Honor." The clerk processed the fine. Papers were stamped. The moment passed as quickly as it had exploded. Within minutes, another case was being called as though nothing unusual had occurred. Judge Mercer leaned back in his high leather chair, satisfied. Authority reasserted. Order restored. He believed the matter was over. He was wrong. Outside the courthouse, the man paused at the top of the stone steps. The afternoon sun rested low in the sky, casting long shadows across the pavement. He inhaled slowly, deeply, letting the tension move through him instead of settle inside him. His name was Daniel Carter, and he had spent a lifetime mastering one discipline above all others: remain composed, especially when someone expects you not to be. He descended the steps calmly, ignoring the curious stares from those who had witnessed the exchange. Inside his chest, there was no rage, only a quiet clarity. In his car, Daniel sat still for a moment before reaching into his briefcase. He removed the receipt for the contempt fine and placed it carefully into a slim leather folder. The folder was worn but immaculate. On the front, embossed in understated lettering, were two words: Judicial Review. He closed the folder gently, glanced at his watch, and reached for his phone. The call connected on the first ring. "It's time," Daniel said quietly. There was a brief pause on the other end. "Understood." He ended the call without another word. 2 days later, subtle tremors began beneath the polished floors of Judge Mercer's courtroom. The first sign was an email, then another, then several more. Judge Mercer's clerk frowned at her computer screen as subject lines multiplied. Request for archived case transcripts. Inquiry into contempt rulings. Demand for recorded proceedings from the past 18 months. All originating from Washington. When she mentioned it to the judge, he waved a dismissive hand. Routine oversight, he scoffed. Every few years they pretend to audit something. But the requests did not stop. They intensified. Certified video footage was requested. Specific case numbers highlighted. Patterns examined. Whispers began circulating among the staff. Court reporters were asked to resubmit transcripts they had already filed. Bailiffs were interviewed discreetly. Administrative personnel were contacted directly by federal offices. Judge Mercer's laughter grew thinner each day. Then one morning, a sealed envelope arrived by courier. Official. Marked confidential. The judge tore it open with mild irritation that quickly drained from his face as he read. His eyes moved line by line. Slowly. Then again. Daniel Carter was not merely a citizen who had bristled under courtroom discipline. He was a senior federal prosecutor assigned to a special division reviewing judicial conduct across multiple districts. Specifically, conduct involving misuse of contempt citations and patterns of bias within courtroom proceedings. Judge Mercer felt his throat tighten. "This can't be right," he muttered. But it was. Daniel Carter had not raised his voice in that courtroom because he didn't need to. The review had already been in progress. The contempt citation had simply accelerated it. Within a week, Judge Mercer formally requested a meeting. He asked that it be private. Daniel agreed, on the condition it take place at the federal building, in a conference room with recorded documentation and legal staff present. When the two men sat across from one another, the power dynamic had shifted so quietly it was almost invisible. "You embarrassed me," Judge Mercer began stiffly, attempting to regain footing. "If I had known who you were." Daniel held his gaze evenly. "That," he said, his voice calm but firm, "is precisely the problem." The judge faltered. "You must understand," Mercer continued, his confidence thinning. "Courtrooms are tense environments. We maintain control." "Control," Daniel repeated softly. "Or intimidation?" The word lingered in the air. "I would prefer we resolve this discreetly," Mercer pressed. "There's no need for reputations to suffer." Daniel's expression did not change. "We don't operate discreetly when it comes to integrity," he said. "We operate correctly." The formal hearing began 3 weeks later. There were no raised voices, no dramatic accusations, no public spectacle, just facts. Video recordings from the courtroom were displayed on monitors. Clips of interruptions, dismissive remarks, rapid contempt rulings that appeared disproportionate to the behavior shown. Testimonies were collected from former defendants. Some were small business owners. Some were single parents. Some had simply asked clarifying questions and been met with hostility. Patterns emerged. A rhythm of impatience. A tone of superiority. A consistent escalation toward contempt citations in situations where other judges would have issued warnings. Daniel spoke only once during the proceedings. He stood, buttoned his jacket calmly, and addressed the review panel. "In that courtroom," he said evenly, "I was treated as though my voice itself was defiance. Not because of what I said, but because of who I was perceived to be." He paused, letting the silence settle. When authority assumes disrespect without cause, it reveals something deeper than impatience. It reveals bias. Judge Mercer stared at the polished surface of the table before him. Daniel continued, "I did not identify myself intentionally. I wanted to experience the courtroom exactly as any other citizen would. What I encountered was not justice guided by fairness. It was authority guided by ego." The room remained still. The decision did not take long. Judge Clayton Mercer was removed from the bench, pending permanent disciplinary action. His record would reflect formal reprimand. His authority to preside over cases was suspended indefinitely. The gavel that once struck so confidently was boxed and removed from his chambers. The announcement was public, not vindictive, not theatrical, simply factual. Months passed. The courthouse continued operating, but its atmosphere felt different. Lighter somehow, more attentive. A new judge was appointed, younger, measured, known for patience rather than dominance. One afternoon, Daniel walked past the same courtroom where he had once stood alone. He paused outside the open doors. Inside, a young man stood nervously before the bench. His hands trembled slightly as he attempted to explain a misunderstanding regarding a filing deadline. The new judge leaned forward gently. "Take your time," she said. "We're here to understand, not to rush." The young man swallowed and began again, this time steadier. Daniel watched for a moment longer. The air inside that courtroom did not feel tense. It felt balanced. He felt no triumph, no satisfaction born of revenge, only quiet resolution. Justice, he knew, was rarely loud. It did not need spectacle to be powerful. It required patience, precision, persistence. As he stepped back into the sunlight, Daniel adjusted his coat and allowed himself the faintest smile. He had not raised his voice that day in court. He had not argued the fine. He had not demanded respect. He had simply allowed the system to reveal itself, and then he had held it accountable. Back at his office later that evening, Daniel opened the leather folder one final time. The contempt receipt rested inside, alongside official documents detailing the completed review. He studied the paper for a brief moment. $500, a small price for a necessary truth. He closed the folder gently and placed it into a drawer. Some battles were fought with anger. Others were fought with patience. And the quiet ones were often the most powerful of all.